Hey, welcome in.
Welcome to the Arrowhead Addict podcast.
We are here coming to you live.
The Kansas City Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You only win a Super Bowl 2 times every 5 years, right?
Oh!
The warm-up act is over. Let's bring in Melissa Etheridge, massive Chiefs fan. Melissa,
Super Bowl champion, 2-time Pro Bowler, and Trent Green. Trent Green, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
And he picked it up! He picked it up! He's gonna score!
and we'll see you next week. But until then, as always, go Chiefs.
Welcome. It's Wacky Wednesday here on the Arrowhead Addict channel. I'm Adam Best, here with Sterling Holmes and producer Richard, as always. Sterling, my man, how you doing?
I'm good. Your stash is still strong, and I am still jealous of that.
It's on its last leg. It's gonna go. But I just had to do one more show. With it. But how do you feel today? We're getting bombarded by news.
I feel great until I heard the news about Dave Merritt, which we'll get to in just a moment. But it's fun, man. The Combine, starting in February 26th, that really is the kickoff of the next season. We have a lot to get into. Who would have thought that on February 28th we'd be talking this much about off-season stuff, actual things happening, and not just a list of what player reminds you of what beer. No, we have actual news to talk about, which makes this very exciting.
Yeah, most fan bases get about 8 weeks of a breather. We get 2 weeks here in Kansas City, but no complaints, right? None at all.
No complaints. And if you guys have no complaints, go sign up with DraftKings Sportsbook. Make sure you get that first bet on them. New customers will get a second chance bet up to $1,000 when signing up with our promo code Arrowhead. That means if your first bet loses, you'll get your full wager returned as a bonus bet up to $1,000. Signing up with our code Arrowhead not only covers your first bet, but also gets you access to daily rewards and other profit boosts. If you're looking to join DraftKings, go download the app and register with our promo code Arrowhead to make sure your first bet is covered. This offer is only available to new customers who are 21 plus and physically present in legal gambling states. Please remember to always gamble responsibly. Check the episode description for the full terms of the offer to see if you qualify.
Let's welcome on Arrowhead Addict draft expert Price Carter. He's going to come on and chop up the draft with us. Welcome, Price.
Thanks for having me, guys. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. How are things on your end?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. I can walk now, which is good. I broke my ankle about 2 months ago, so being able to walk is nice. And newborn baby girl just turned a month old, so we're doing great. If the Chiefs could just stop, breaking news every 30 to 45 minutes, I would almost feel like things are getting back to normal.
I guess this is what it takes to, continuously win championships. And we've got a great discussion today. But first off, a bit of news on Dave Merritt. I just heard from Sterling here. Sterling, what's the situation?
Yeah, per Mike Garafolo, the 49ers are interviewing defensive backs coach Dave Merritt for the defensive coordinator position, according to sources. Merritt, obviously the longtime assistant, confidant of Steve Spagnuolo. Chiefs had the 4th-ranked pass defense this season. This would be a massive loss. We've seen the Chiefs perpetually get not just identify talent and develop talent there, but get the best out of those guys. I mean, Rashad Fenton was a 6th-rounder who was a viable cornerback. He goes elsewhere. What happens? Bashad Breeland comes here, has his best years in Kansas City. Now, Kendall Fuller's been solid elsewhere, but I still think he had some pretty darn good years here in Kansas City. Hell, even Tyrann Mathieu, I think his best years came here in Kansas City. We know what Dave Merritt can do. He's a very underrated cog in the larger system, which again, on the defensive side is headed by Steve Spagnuolo. So if Dave Merritt goes to San Fran and is the DC, first and foremost, congratulations to him. A lot of talent there, but man, that would break my heart.
Yeah, the timing of this isn't ideal because if you lose L'Jarius Sneed, you don't want to lose Dave Merritt, the guy that's going to coach up his replacement. You got to have faith in Brett Veach drafting corners and defensive backs. Also, doesn't get talked a lot, but there's a guy named Mark Richard, I believe is his name, in the data department. He won the Big Data Bowl several years ago for identifying isolating defensive back coverage. So this is a nerd show. I'm going to give a shout out to
the big data bowl is that there with the puppy bowl? Like on one end is like the nerds with the big data bowl, and the other end it's like, dude, I love dogs with the puppy bowl. Like they're just coming together here.
Yeah, nerdom doesn't rank much higher than that. So, but you have all these different guys, Steve Spagnuolo also being one of them. But I think Dave Merritt is as essential to defensive back development as anyone in the kingdom. So, but he deserves this. That should be said, that he deserves this opportunity. He's been killing it for a long time. So if San Francisco brings him over there, best of luck to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of bridging the gap between the Puppy Bowl and L'Jarius Sneed here a little bit. Dave Merritt, to your point, Adam, he is kind of one of the Chiefs' Moneyball effects, right? Like they've found dollars on the ground and picked them up in the defensive back room time and time again. They have effectively not paid anyone in the defensive backfield that they've drafted since Eric Berry. It's been a long time, and they're able to take a guy who's just kind of traitsy from Louisiana Tech and turn him into, basically what most people think was an all-pro level corner. So it's a big deal. And one thing I will point out, though, when it comes to the San Francisco defensive coordinator job is there's a ton of talent there. He would love to work with Charvarius Ward again. Hafunga's a great safety. But that is kind of a dead man walking job right now. The Shanahan system, especially Shanahan's, have went through defensive coordinators quite a bit. And Steve Wilkes is pretty respected around the league. I don't think it'll go unnoticed, kind of like how quickly they threw him underneath the rug. They interviewed Brandon Staley as well. Another aspect to this is they will get a compensatory pick if Dave Merritt is hired. I believe it'd be at the end of the third round. So there is a slight bright spot. But yeah, I mean, Dave Merritt's value has been super important to the Chiefs, and it would be very nice to have him going into what might be a transition year for the secondary.
To follow up on that Moneyball point, they have consistently been bottom 2, 3, 4, 5 in money spent on the secondary. So he is a big part of that. Let's transition right over to L'Jarius Sneed, who we mentioned. He's been franchise tagged officially and has been given permission to seek a trade, I think, is the last report we heard. Is he a Chief next season? We'll start with you, Price.
At this point, you have to lean towards no. I think obviously the going and being able to seek permission for a trade, that verbiage is a little interesting to me. That sounds a little bit like go see if you think you can find better on the market, maybe. I still would be surprised if the Chiefs paid someone at his age. I know that 27 is young in like normal people years, but that's getting up there in NFL years. And I think that the Chiefs, they're going to lean into what they have done well, and that's scouting and drafting the defensive back position. I'm interested to see how Chris Jones kind of folds into this. Obviously, it's kind of hard to talk about one without the other when it comes to the cost implications of this. Personally, for me, I think the tag for him to play on the tag makes a lot of sense. The Chiefs get another year of elite cornerback play. $19 million is a huge increase in salary for L'Jarius Sneed, a fourth-round pick. And the Chiefs get that, another year of control of a good player, and then they're not locked into him long-term. But I think that they might want to do right by him and give him that opportunity.
Well, I don't think L'Jarius Sneed would play on the franchise tag. Like, I know he seems very amenable right now. We heard his thoughts and his talking points of, hey, whatever happens, basically he's good to go. Man, there's no way a guy who's 27, who's all of a sudden going to be 28 then as a cornerback hitting the free agent market would be amenable to playing on that contract, in my opinion. I know $19.8 million is a lot, especially for a dude who was a fourth-round draft pick, right? That's a lot of money. But what would you think he would get guaranteed if he hit the free agent market right now? $40+ million easy. Like easy, guaranteed. We're not talking total contract. That's guaranteed money. If something were to happen to a guy who, by the way, had a banged-up knee the entirety of last year, yes, he played through it, and I've said it multiple times now, you shouldn't have alarm bells ringing, but you should have at least a smoke alarm. That little beep, beep, beep in the background, you should take notice of that. That is something to monitor as well. I don't see L'Jarius wanting to play on the franchise tag. Makes no sense from his side of things. I think a trade makes the most sense, especially if you can get a second rounder back in return. Now, we've kind of gone through the list, Matt Connor and myself yesterday. So if you want to check out the entire list of free agent players who were tagged and then traded, you can. There has not been many, but it's starting to happen more and more and more. Including
D Ford.
including D Ford. What I think would be interesting is, now I get it, it wouldn't be necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, if Dave Merritt were to leave right now, that third rounder is not in this one, but in next year's draft. Is that how that works?
Yes, correct.
So it's not this one. It would make it more palatable if it was in this one, because you're like, oh, well, it's L'Jarius Sneed and a third, or it's, okay, we get a second and a third, just however you want to break that down. I think the Chiefs will try and keep him. I think you're right there. Price, the verbiage is almost, hey, see what you can get on the open market, then come back to us. We'll let you know if we can match that or not. But I do think if Dave Merritt goes and L'Jarius Sneed goes, you're right. It is going to be a little bit of a feeling through period, especially early on in the Chiefs secondary.
And I think one thing that's important to kind of remember too is to not be a victim of the most recent thing that we've seen, recency bias, right? This time last year after the Eagles Super Bowl, if you said, hey, the Chiefs, they might trade L'Jarius Sneed, you'd probably be upset to lose a good player, but it wouldn't be this panic level that it is now. This year has been his best year, and he definitely deserves to be paid upon this last year. It's the full body of work. But why was this his standout year? It's his fourth year in the system. He did play outside more than he has, McDuffie in the slot. But at some point, you got to kind of say, the contract year's undefeated. Yep. This might be the outlier more than it is the true L'Jarius Sneed.
Yeah, do you pay for the best year, like in baseball, or do you pay for the future? That's what it comes down to. Again, I always say cornerbacks are like relievers in baseball. A lot of variance. I don't know if I'm the guy that wants to make that bet.
It's the most roller coaster position of them all. And Price, you mentioned age here. There's a thing we call the DiCaprio rule on this show, which, Leonardo DiCaprio famously doesn't date anyone over the age of 26. Unless you're Chris Jones, Patrick Mahomes, or Travis Kelce, I don't think Brett Veach is very interested in you if you are 27 or older. So that's something to remember with L'Jarius Sneed. He's at a up and down position, getting older, the knee. You add up all these other things along with how good the Chiefs are at finding corners. I have a lot more confidence that they're going to find another good corner as compared to, can they replace 70% of Chris Jones? I don't have a lot of faith there. I haven't seen them draft and develop another defensive tackle other than Chris Jones, who wasn't even drafted by this GM. So, well, let's move on to, if he does get moved, who are some corners in this draft the Chiefs could target? And go ahead, Sterling.
Very quickly, just final thoughts. I think Angry Drunken German brings up a very good point here. With the cap bump and the salary cap rising by 30 plus million, everyone's like, this is great for Kansas City. Now they can afford some of their guys. I almost think you can almost use this as a negative, because now other teams, they have so much money to throw around. You saw what happened with Miami outbidding Kansas City for Tyreek Hill. You're telling me there's a team out there that's not going to say, all right, we can offer $3 million more for L'Jarius Sneed than Kansas City, easily $3 million more than KC can AAV, because we have nothing. We have all this money sitting around. We have a quarterback on a rookie deal. If you're Washington, if you're Chicago, why wouldn't you do that? Even if you're New England, you have nothing going on down there. Houston, for example, has so much cap room. That makes me nervous with Chris Jones. If Houston just says, we think we're here. We have CJ Stroud on a rookie contract, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Will Anderson, all on rookie deals. They have a lot of money to work with. They can overpay for one of these elite guys. That makes me a little nervous. So I'm with you, Angry Drunken German there.
And I also wonder if they might find a way to poison pill this, where doing a structure that Kansas City won't match, because there are things structurally with their contracts that the Chiefs won't do. They don't like doing super long contracts. They don't like doing void years and whatnot. So that could get interesting. So if Sneed does get moved, what's the compensation, and who are some corners in this year's draft that the Chiefs could target to replace him?
Yeah, yesterday I tweeted out that I think that some Chiefs fans might be in for a rude awakening as far as the compensation goes. You have to remember, L'Jarius Sneed means more to the Chiefs right now than it does almost any other team, particularly because he's under control. Any team acquiring L'Jarius Sneed is going to have to give up a pick and then a contract. That's kind of a double whammy for a lot of teams. Someone had mentioned that the Marcus Peters compensation, which was Marcus Peters in a sixth for a second that year and a fourth the following year to the LA Rams, that might be a good comparison. Obviously, I think L'Jarius Sneed is a better locker room guy than Marcus Peters was at the time. Marcus Peters had elite ball production as far as what he did defending passes and intercepting the ball, but he didn't defend the run well, and he wasn't that true cover lockdown guy that Sneed has been. So I think you start kind of in that area. A day 3 pick and maybe a day 2 pick is kind of what you're going for. And then the quantity, are we talking like, 2 third-round picks, a second-round pick? If you were to ever get a first, you would absolutely love it and run to the counter for that for sure. I don't think that that's realistic. Keeping in mind, again, the team acquiring him is acquiring a 27-year-old defensive back who missed all the preseason with an injury, who, while he does intercept the ball, he's had 10 interceptions in his career. He's not some elite takeaway guy, never made an all-pro team. Again, L'Jarius Sneed means more to the Chiefs than any other team right now. So I do feel really good about them definitely at least pulling in a day 2 pick, though. And, one of the most influential drafts that the Chiefs have had was when they had 2 day 2 selections or 2 second-round picks, that Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton year. And this draft is very deep. There's a lot of talent in this draft. There's going to be a lot of great players taken in that realm. So I totally support that. As far as the draft goes, the corner class is very diverse. It doesn't have this top, Sauce Gardner type of guy, can't miss prospect. Terrion Arnold out of Alabama will probably be one of the first guys taken. He's just a solid, well-rounded corner. Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. He is rapidly climbing up boards, had a really good Senior Bowl. He's going to test great this week. He's got great ball production. I think he has a chance to be the first corner taken. But after that, it really kind of starts going into what you're looking for. There's some really great slot guys. There's some great outside guys. There's some press man guys, some zone guys. A couple of guys that I think look very spagsy. TJ Tampa out of Iowa State. I think he'll probably go in the second round. He has the ideal length that Spags likes. He kind of struggles with the things that most Spags corners struggle with, getting his head around whenever the ball is thrown his way. Long speed, but he plays physical. He supports the run. He presses off the line of scrimmage well. Missouri fans will be familiar with Enos Rakestraw. He's another guy that kind of seems a little spagsy. Another name that I like is Josh Newton out of TCU. He's another guy that he plays the game the way Spags likes it. He does support the run. He has an knack for splash plays. He's been effective against some top level competition in some of the bigger games that they've played. And then Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. I think Newton and Phillips are probably maybe day 3 names or late day 2 names. TJ Tampa and Rakestraw, especially Rakestraw, could go in the first. Tampa, I suspect the second round. But again, going back to the Dave Merritt conversation, the Chiefs have had this knack for being able to find players way later in the draft than most teams. And honestly, they might not invest until day 3. I think that the team was very high on the play of Nick Jones. I've had a scout that has talked to me, a former scout with the Commanders has talked to me and said that they really like the Nick Jones fit for the Chiefs. And then Najee Johnson was playing really well before he tore his ACL. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out. But there's definitely talent there. And the thing that I like about it this year is that there's all sorts of talent. It's not just big outside guys or press man guys or zone guys.
It's really hard to put my finger on the value of L'Jarius Sneed because I do agree that Spags is a unique system and he does have more value in Kansas City than elsewhere. At the same time, it is very hard to find a guy that can play press coverage with A.J. Brown, with DK Metcalf, who is also quick enough to travel with the likes of Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson. I mean, those guys just aren't you don't find them. So I'm also wondering, another trade that we did that we should bring up is that Orlando Brown trade. Could we trade maybe a second to move up a little bit? A pick swap. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's something I looked at. Like, for instance, the Lions have 2 third-round picks. They'd be a team that would make a lot of sense. They're obviously a team that's kind of like mashing the throttle right now, trying to go all in. They need defensive back help. They have 2 third-round picks, one from the TJ Hawkinson trade. So you could, in theory, like trade pick 95 and get the Minnesota pick in there as well, the higher of their 2 third-round picks. So yeah, that's definitely an option that they could flip that. I think, you want to try to get as many picks inside that top 100 as possible. I think that there's several really good, talented players that are going to be taken in that realm, even in the, the 75 to 100. That's, where the Chiefs found Leo Chanel and Brian Cook. So they found great value there in the past.
And Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, has stated that this draft is pretty weak on day 3. And I think the NIL has something to do with that. This is the least amount of underclassmen declaring since 2011. So we're just not going to have the depth in this draft. So I think the more Chiefs picks we can get in the top 100, like you said, and maybe even trading up would be a good option, like they did with McDuffie, because sitting at 32, looking at the tackles and receivers, it's kind of like, are you going to get a sure thing? But if you could get up, if you had extra draft capital, extra ammo to get up into, say, the early 20s again, you'd feel a lot better about getting something closer to a sure thing.
I think it's tough because you have 5 draft picks right now. You're going to get a couple compensatory picks. Obviously, Dave Merritt might add another one, but you don't have a full arsenal to deal with right now. You want darts, especially with the ability the Chiefs have shown, Brett Veach has shown to hit on darts later on in the draft as well. They have a lot more holes than I think people want to realize. Obviously, wide receiver is the first one. Secondary comes in mind with that L'Jarius. But defensive line, I've said it once, I'll say it again. The only guy currently under contract is Neil Farrell outside of a future deal for Christensen and Isaiah Buggs. Like, even if Chris Jones is back, you need to get a game changer or at least a guy who can help Chris Jones on the interior defensive line. I mean, there are multiple positions, not just one. I think trading up is going to be hard. Plus, it takes 2 to tango. Let's be real now. If they couldn't trade back when Will Levis was on the board, they ain't trading back and getting up another second rounder, even if Michael Penix Jr. is still there. I'm sorry. The Chiefs are kind of in no man's land.
Who wants to help them? I mean, you have some forward-thinking teams like the Ravens who will trade with him and do think, I don't care who I'm trading with as long as I make my program better. But I think something like 20 teams are just going to be like, hell no, I'm not helping the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I'd rather deal with somebody else.
Super chat from Raymond Chandler. Appreciate you, Raymond. Always appreciate you. Says, will Sneed be as good on other teams' defensive schemes coordinators as he was under Spags? And yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about. Most likely not. But again, Charvarius Ward, we thought maybe no. And what did Charvarius Ward do? Well, he went to the right organization, San Fran, and they used him the correct way. He was a second-team All-Pro this season. He did, I think, get even better this year. So I think it's easy to say no in this scheme, but you have to go to one that also uses and utilizes your skill set. Like if Charvarius went to, I don't know, the Panthers, probably not. Like if L'Jarius goes to a good defensive-minded team, I think, yeah, he could be the same guy. But again, if he goes to, let's just say, I don't know, Atlanta, Minnesota, like it's going to be tough. I think it's a big aspect there.
Yeah, Minnesota, they ask a lot of their corners because they're just constantly sending pressure from all these different ways. Like they run a very unique defense there. And I think, I'm not sure that we get L'Jarius Sneed without Trent McDuffie a little bit. They are a tandem, and what he's provided in the slot has really allowed Sneed to play where he's most effective. The Chiefs used to use Sneed in the slot, and we've seen, McDuffie kind of become the elite blitzer out of the slot, whereas that was Sneed's role for quite some time too. So yeah, to your point, I think it's just going to be finding the right spot for him. But the good news is like there's a lot of teams can use more than one good corner, and like you were talking about the Texans, right? Do they try to go all in and then have this awesome cornerback duo with Derek Stingley? But then again, you get into the whole like, are you really going to help the enemy? I mean, I would not be surprised at all if the Texans are a team that we see in the AFC Championship soon, as good as CJ Stroud looks. So it's tough. The suitor, it's more complicated than people want to know or want to admit.
Yeah.
I'm muted.
Yeah, I figured you're muted.
Let's move.
Good for one a show, at least.
Not what a show. You're thinking of Connor. So the other big news of the day, or one of the bigger items, is that MVS has been released by the team. Marquez Valdes-Scantling saving roughly $12 million in cap room. Not chump change. This is something that personally I've been calling for a long time. You don't want to take glee in anybody getting cut, but he was extremely fairly compensated during his time in Kansas City. You could argue overpaid pretty easily. He got 2 rings. He did his time here. I'm sure he'll land somewhere. Guys who run 23 miles per hour in the GPS, they don't grow on trees, right? And theoretically, he was supposed to be the kind of outside stretch X who kind of lifted the lid and pulled defenses vertical, right? That didn't really transpire last season, but the Chiefs need that element in their offense. They got way too way too horizontal last year. So, Bryce, who are some kind of stretch X sort of players, MVS-like players in this draft that Chiefs could look at if they wanted a cheaper, younger player with higher upside, perhaps?
There actually are quite a few names that fit this role. And to your point, you kind of brought up there's kind of two different players that they've had do this recently, right? They've had Tyreek Hill, who is the ultimate vertical and horizontal weapon. There's some guys that are obviously never going to come close to Tyreek Hill, but offer some of the things that he did. And then there are some more like MVS molds. Probably a name that a lot of people know is Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. He's everything that MVS kind of is, except went to a better school and was more exceptional in college. He's 6'4", 205 pounds. He had 17 touchdowns this year, like led all of college football in touchdowns. But like MVS, he's kind of an average route runner. He doesn't run a full route tree. He tends to round off routes, but is great at the catch point as well, and has been great with tracking the ball. He is probably be a pipe dream for the Chiefs at 32. I imagine that they will probably have to move up. We've just seen that the NFL, they value speed so much, and that is Thomas's primary weapon. And even with the three guys going up top, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Roma Dunze, there's going to be a team that's going to talk themselves into Brian Thomas Jr. very easily. And in fact, the Bills would be a great fit with Josh Allen's arm, frankly. Another guy, this is a personal favorite of mine, is Troy Franklin out of Oregon. Franklin's 6'2", 178 pounds, so he's a little bit slightly built, but another vertical stretch guy. But he does have, again, staying true to the MVS format, drops have been a little bit of an issue for him, but he is more than just a vertical stretch guy. Thomas is a little bit more limited route tree. Franklin does run the route tree a little bit more, and he has been used. Obviously, the Oregon offense is a ton of screens and bubbles. Franklin's very good at that as well after the catch. But I like both of those guys. They're both bigger than, some of the other options out there. And then you start getting into some guys who aren't quite the vertical stretch, but are that traditional X. Adonai Mitchell is his actual name. He goes by 80. He's 6'4", sub 200, but close to 200. He's out of Texas. A lot of people will be familiar with him. Was a very successful player at his accolades really went to Texas to get his production up. He's a fluid mover. He has a nice route runner. He plays with size. There are some questions about kind of how he does when he's not drawn up in the play. There's some questionable effort from him at times, but also if you watch Quinn Ewers play more than 3 or 4 highlights, you can kind of understand how he get frustrated. And then a name that I kind of like that is kind of cheesy. He frankly kind of exists in the same realm that Tank Dell did as far as size goes. Xavier Worthy, also from Texas. He's probably has a chance to be one of the fastest players in the draft. He is probably the first player that the Chiefs could bring in since Tyreek Hill that teams truly could fear him in the horizontal game. I know McCole Hardman has done that for them. It's been a while since they've had someone to do that. Tony and Sky Moore, they've just not filled that role. So Xavier Worthy is another name that I like there. And then even you can even go down the board a little bit more. Ricky Pearsall is a guy that might make some sense out of Florida. Slicky Ricky, as they call him. He's probably going to be more of a slot guy, but he does have some dynamic speed. One other name that I will throw out there that could make some sense is Xavier Legette from South Carolina. Again, he's kind of a physical freak. He's 6'3", 227 pounds, and was clocked at 23 miles an hour on the GPS tracker this year. Him and Spencer Rattler were a pretty strong connection this year at South Carolina. He kind of gives off DK Metcalf vibes. A lot of people will compare him to that just because of playing in the SEC and everything, but he's the type of guy that seriously could run 3 or 4 routes and be okay, stretching the field. So those are some names that I like. Obviously, this wide receiver class, right now let me look here. I think I have 16 guys that I would call a day 1 or day 2 pick. So there's a lot of flavors out there too. You've got your yak guys, you've got your underneath guys, your slot guys, and then you have the true complete guys.
Yeah, Daniel Jeremiah had 12 wide receivers in his top 50. So it's going to be a good year for receivers. And like you said, a lot of different flavors. Last year, the class ran pretty small, which is another amazing feat for Brett Veach that he got a wide receiver with some size out of a class where that seemed to not exist. A couple of questions on those guys. Xavier Worthy, doesn't he sort of have MVS-like hands a little bit? I'm not someone that harps on drops a little bit, but didn't it get pretty bad for him in Texas?
Yes, yeah. So you're exactly right. Worthy did struggle. Not that there's like a different level to drops, but there are some drop. Like when MVS drops the ball, it's like, well, of course you're going to drop the ball. You're like fielding a punt, man. Put your arms above your head and catch the ball. Worthy's drops were a little bit more focus related, but keep in mind, one of the things that the Chiefs have been really good about is, particularly this year, is seeing what players can be for them versus what they were in college. Rashee Rice struggled with drops in college. And even in the preseason, we thought that was going to be an issue. And he ended up being one of the most reliable hands on the team. Obviously, drops are one of those things that sometimes they stick with a player. One thing that I will note about Worthy, too, is he was used in a lot of different ways. I have a write-up on him for Fansided's draft website with the first pick. And he can be seen running out of the backfield, running out of the slot, in motion. He's kind of one of those guys, like he's a joker, right? He's just kind of all over a wild card all the time. So not that explains it, but again, Quinn Ewers doesn't necessarily make it easier on his receivers. There's not a lot of just like right in the breadbasket catches.
Quick thought on Troy Franklin too. I've seen different heights for him. I've seen 6'4", 178. I think that's kind of important because we're talking about a BMI here that is a true outlier. I think Todd Pinkston, size-wise, is just about the only successful wide receiver who's been that tall and that skinny. Are you worried about him from a strength and size standpoint, like getting pressed into oblivion or whatever?
I think last draft, we learned a lot about measurements, right? Like there's a lot of thresholds last year for a lot of different players that got taken that ended up not mattering. People worried about Tank Dell and other prospects like that who were undersized. One thing I think at the receiver position that matters more than anything is how offenses have advanced to being able to get receivers free releases. I mean, you've got Tyreek Hill lining up at tight end who gets like a 3-second jump start at the line of scrimmage before the ball is ever even snapped. The ingenuity in offenses really helps some of these guys who are smaller. Yeah, Xavier Worthy can't exist in the 1990 NFL, but he can today because of the way the game is played. Troy Franklin, the heights, they're always weird. Like we thought part of the reason why Rashee Rice's stock fell is because he was supposed to be, 6'2", 210, and he came in closer to 6 foot, 200. And there's just a big difference in the game that he was playing as far as jumping up vertical. He compared his game to DeAndre Hopkins. Troy Franklin, I think his profile matches a little bit more of what his size is. These guys, they know what thresholds they need to hit. I imagine he's probably going to try to get closer to 180 pounds for the combine, 185. But I think ultimately the question is can this player separate? I have consistently gone back to the fact that Franklin finds separation. He has something that the Chiefs covet, which is speed. And I think the Chiefs have their yak guy, right? Rashee Rice excels in that role. And I feel confident in them being able to use some of the other players that are on the roster in that role. So can Franklin, track the ball when it's thrown his way wide open, like the Eagles game where MVS didn't? Hopefully. And again, the cost effectiveness of that is valuable too.
Where do you land on Brennan Rice?
Brennan Rice, son of Jerry Rice. It would be cool to have Rice baby on the team, have both of them. He's a guy that I think there obviously is reason for encouraging signs with him. There's some optimism about where he can go as a player. He didn't have the best year on tape this year. I think that probably mid day 2 for him. For him, it's going to just be, can he land in the right spot to use his skill set? I could see the Chiefs using a player like Rice. I could also see them saying like, that's not necessarily the type of player we want. I think he could exist in an offense with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. It would just be interesting to see. But to the point, obviously, you like the bloodlines there. You like the coaching there as far as where he is. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, going from Caleb Williams to Patrick Mahomes, it's a pretty good succession plan.
Yeah. I will say I talked to Brennan Rice on Radio Row, and I loved just the aura and vibe he brought. Very smart kid. I will say he didn't run the hill. So for those of you old school football fans who know about the hill and Jerry Rice's workout, a little surprising that his son did not know, or he knew about the hill, but did not run the hill. But I liked what he brought just based on sometimes sons of phenomenal athletes. You can get that entitlement feel. he had the opposite. He was trying to prove that he's different, that he is living up to the name. So I thought that was pretty interesting. As far as we have a pretty cool thing for everyone who's listening right now. Attention, Kansas City Chiefs fans. Your team has clinched the Super Bowl 58 title, marking a monumentous victory that deserves to be celebrated in grand style. We're thrilled to offer you an exclusive piece of history, a limited edition Super Bowl 58 Champions football. Crafted with unmatched quality, this collector's item captures the glory of the Chiefs' triumph like nothing else. But here's the catch. Only a few hundred of these commemorative masterpieces are left, making it a rare gem you do not want to miss. Make it yours today and save $10 instantly with the special code ADDICT at checkout. And there's more. Order through our exclusive link by the end of February, and you'll also be entered into a once-in-a-lifetime draw to win a Champions football for free. Don't let this opportunity slip through your hands. Celebrate your Chiefs' victory with a keepsake that stands the test of time. Order now and keep the spirit of Super Bowl 58 alive forever.
We got to talk about our guy, Chris Jones, and it sounds like things are kind of headed into a positive direction there. That's just kind of the vibe I get. But regardless what happens with Chris, the Chiefs need interior help there on the defensive line. So, Price, who are some prospects that Chiefs could look at defensive tackle?
Well, obviously, the Chiefs have a really big need at defensive tackle, interior defensive line in general. They truly need probably a nose type of player and a defensive tackle as well. There's some really good depth at the defensive tackle position in the draft. Nose tackle, not so much. Probably the only player that I'd be comfortable with taking as a true nose, someone you can line up overhead off the center or shade off his shoulder, would be T'Vondre Sweat out of Texas. If you watch the college football playoff or follow Texas football, he's a fun player. Humans just aren't supposed to move like T'Vondre Sweat does at his size. He's probably played close to 370, 380 pounds. I suspect he didn't weigh in at the combine. I don't know if that was because he was trying to make a weight loss effort for the combine here, or he didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl. But I don't know, either that or he's put on weight. If he's putting on weight, he could be closer to 4 bills. I suspect he's probably going to weigh in around 340. But humans just don't move like him. I mean, they used him on offense, catching passes kind of Dontari Poe-esque. And him and his running mate, Byron Murphy, who we'll get to in a second, they're probably the best interior defensive line in the NFL. He is more than just a gap plugger. He does have pass rush ability. Honestly, he might be one of the better nose tackle prospects since like Dexter Lawrence or Vita V. And that role really matters in the NFL, especially whenever you consider teams are always looking to play more lighter boxes. If you can have a guy who can plug up the run and you be able to play 4 defensive linemen and be able to play with more defensive backs on the field, that's really valuable. Probably a day 2 name is McKinley Jackson out of Texas A&M. Not nearly the prospect of T'Vondre Sweat. He just needs to get more consistent as far as like he has plays where he looks like the best player on the field, and there's other plays that he seems to kind of get shut down after 2 players or a player gets their hands on him. Defensive tackle wise, there are quite a few more names. This is going to be kind of more trying to replace Chris Jones. Obviously, there's no replacing him, the player, but his role. Byron Murphy, who we mentioned, he's probably going to be the first defensive tackle taken. He's going to put on a show this week at the Combine. He is more of that, gap shooting, penetrating, pass rushing defensive tackle. He's really climbed up boards this year. He is a monster, and he leads all of college football from interior pressures on the quarterback. So really piled up the stats there. And I'm sure playing next to T'Vondre Sweat helped him too, as far as not having to worry about the run as much. A name that might actually be in play for the Chiefs at pick 32 is Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. Again, we were talking pre-pod a little bit about how following the draft, it's one of those things that kind of, if you follow it throughout the year, you can get a good explanation of why players are taken where they are taken. Johnny Newton, as they call him, or Jerzon, he was a guy that at the beginning of this year, even around Christmas time, he'd probably be a top 10 pick. He's out of Illinois. He did have tightrope surgery, I believe. Dane Brugler tweeted something out last week that he won't be testing at the Combine, but will be doing interviews with team. His tape is awesome. I'm always a huge fan of a guy who's like the guy on a defensive line and still dominates. George Karlaftis was that way at Purdue, right? If you faced Purdue, you knew you had to stop George Karlaftis and basically nobody else. Johnny Newton's the same way. And that Illinois defense has been producing some really like tough dogs here in the NFL, Sidney Brown and Devin Witherspoon, and Johnny Newton's another chapter in that. I would absolutely love if he fell to the Chiefs at 32. Another name that we just got here in the chat as well is Leonard Taylor out of Miami. Again, this time probably around like November of last year, 23, he is a guy that a lot of people would have had pegged as a first rounder. There are certain plays in a game where he looks like he's the best player on the field. There are other plays that he looks like he doesn't want to be on the field. Notably, this year, Miami's defense asked him to play more of a true nose role, asked him to put on some weight, did not fit him as a player. I did a film review on him for our other site. He's a guy who against the run, he's not always the most interested, but when he does get a chance to rush the passer, he's very much like Chris Jones in the sense that he's not always piling up sacks. He's not had a ton of numbers in college football, but his impact on the game every time there's so many passes that are thrown away or rushed or hurried, and that's to Taylor's impact. And then some day 3 names, Leonard Taylor, I think he could be in that second round, third round. He very much seems kind of like a player the Chiefs would like, a former 5-star recruit as well. They love to bet on that type of stuff, and he's young. Another thing the Chiefs love. 2 other names that I like, Dwayne Carter out of Duke, and Braden Fisk out of Florida State. They kind of get lumped in together a little bit because they're kind of that same type of player where they're just a well-rounded player. They make impact in the run. They make run the pass rush. They kind of remind me a little bit of what the Chiefs used to get out of Derek Nottie. Not quite the nose that he is. They're a little bit smaller, but a well-rounded player. Fisk is a little old for the Chiefs. He's kind of a old school player. He doesn't play with gloves or pads or anything like that. He just goes out there with his bare hands. I think he's 24. He played college ball somewhere else before Florida State. But both those guys are names I could see. Dwayne Carter continually makes plays for Duke. If you watch him, you just can't help, or if you watch any Duke tape, you just can't help but like watch him and see what the impact he makes on the game. Those are all guys that I like. And, honestly, kind of relating this back to free agency, it wouldn't surprise me if the Chiefs dive into free agency in the interior spot, whether it's they keep Chris Jones or not, and then add on to in the draft. But there's definitely some names here that I think would be available for the Chiefs on day 1, 2, or 3.
Man, that ran the gamut in terms of Chiefs emotions. You had me thinking about Hungry Pig Right with Don Terry Poe. And then you mentioned sometimes maybe you shouldn't draft defensive linemen who play next to other talented defensive linemen. And that conjured Ryan Sims for me because, of course, he famously played next to Julius Peppers, which made his life a lot easier. And he wasn't playing next to Julius Peppers in the pros, so he wasn't the same guy. Yeah, I think they need to do something here. And what you're saying about doing something first in free agency for safety so they don't go into the draft knowing they have to fill this position early, you never want to be in that predicament where you can't take the best player available, right?
Yeah, and I think, for those of us who have ever played around with a mock draft simulator, or for those of us that are like me that do one every day, maybe more than one a day, that they just don't post on Twitter because they're a little obsessed. I think that everyone loves to just kind of go through and go like wide receiver, offensive tackle, interior defensive line, and just hit those positions of need. But that's rarely how a draft falls, right? They don't just hit their top 3 positions of need. That's not how they want to be. I think that the Chiefs will probably try to address these type of things in free agency before. They usually like to try to have a roster that could play a game before they ever, hit the draft. And one of these names I think could potentially fall to. That's normally how these things go. The nose tackle position, especially, like it's just one that gets undervalued frequently. There's always some risers and fallers. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But I would honestly, I could say in some ways that without Chris Jones on the roster next year, interior defensive line is their biggest need, even more than wide receiver or tackle.
I see a lot of folks talking about Mike Pennell, bringing him back in the chat. Sure, but you're not going to count on Mike Pennell to have that Super Bowl performance for 17 games, then add on 3 or 4. I think that's pretty far-fetched, even though I'm a noted, massive Mike Pennell supporter going back to his last tenure in Kansas City. But let's be real now. He's not wanting to go to St. Joe. He's not wanting to go to training camp and OTAs and preseason. You saw what he did in the playoffs. It might be about the same thing. He's proven he does not need to get ready. Dude stays ready. He's a rotational piece, but I don't see him being a big part of what the Chiefs do moving forward. They might bring him back for a postseason run, but I don't think they're counting on Mike Pennell for a full season.
Put him on layaway, right? I also saw a Duncan Idaho in the chat, which is for us nerds out there, a Dune reference. So the Chiefs tackle play last year, I'm going to say that they they didn't thrive. They just survived. The Chiefs survived kind of in spite of the way they played at offensive tackle. Now, Wanya Morris could develop quicker than we expect. Jawan Taylor could rebound off after a year that I think really got off on the wrong foot, literally with the false start penalties and Chris Collingsworth kind of making that a spectacle. And he never really looked like a guy who was comfortable in his own skin last year. So if the Chiefs do decide that they need to make a move there, especially with Donovan Smith potentially not coming back, Bryce, who are some first, second, maybe even third round talents they should be scouting?
The Chiefs, when it comes to tackle play, they're a team that sticks to their thresholds. They basically took the next tackle off the board last year with Wanya Morris. Tyler Steen was taken the second round by the Eagles, but they had the run on tackles in the first round, and then Wanya Morris was like the next true kind of threshold tackle person. When we talk about thresholds, we're talking about height, weight, speed, and arm length, particularly 33-inch arms. They want longer than that or at that. And that just kind of goes back to Andy Reid's staple. He's an offensive line guy. The Chiefs have almost consistently, or not the Chiefs, but Andy Reid historically even has kind of historically taken trench players in the first couple of rounds. Also, looking at this big picture, whenever a draft is rich in certain positions, typically those positions get rated in the first round. It would not surprise me to see 5 or 6 tackles taken and 6 or 7 wide receivers taken in the first round, and then 4 quarterbacks taken. Those are the positions that are rich in this draft, which means the Chiefs are going to have to, be flexible. We talked about that as far as best player available. There's a situation that a Cooper DeJean and from Iowa is the corner. He's the best player on the board, and people would be like, "Oh, a corner? Why would we take a corner here?" But he's a top 10, top 15 player in this draft, in my opinion. As far as tackle goes, there are some guys at the top. All of us would love for Joe Alt to fall to the Chiefs, son of John Alt, former Chiefs legend, but it's just not going to happen. He's too talented. He is a prototype tackle, left tackle, big, tall, strong. He's just not going to be there. Another name is Talisa Fuaga from Oregon State. He also will probably be gone. Then we can start talking possibly, I personally think Olu Fashanu from Penn State. For some reason, his stock is kind of falling. He's still an incredible pass protection left tackle. He has his weaknesses, but I think everyone kind of expected perfection from him this year. So when they didn't get perfection, the market kind of fell on him a little bit. After those 3 guys, that's where we can start talking about the Chiefs zip code. Amarius Mims from Georgia is going to put on a show this week. He is 6'7". He could play tight end. He is an athletic freak. However,
7'1" wingspan, right?
Yeah. I mean, this guy's a pterodactyl.
That's a jumbo jet, man.
Yeah, he is truly one of one as far as the position goes. And the Chiefs would absolutely love to have that type of player. But there are some concerns as well. He's more or less played about 10 games in his college career. They were at right tackle. But a lot of people say that tape against Ohio State in the college football playoff last year where he played is amongst some of the best tackle tape they've seen in college football over the last year. Another name is Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. He is a traitsy guy, big, tall, lean, again, meets all those measurables. He's a little bit more raw. Obviously, the Chiefs like and have an affinity for Oklahoma offensive linemen. They have 2, and they had 3 whenever they had Orlando Brown on the team. So there's a fit there that makes sense. Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU. Obviously, there's a little bit of an Andy Reid BYU connection. He played right tackle this year, but has played left tackle in the past. He's got over 1,600 snaps at tackle in college football. Right now, he's a run-orientated guy just because of BYU's run-heavy offense. But he's another guy that's going to be a great tester, long, makes some sense. There's also J.C. Latham from Alabama. I don't see him being on the board for Chiefs. He also is probably going to be under that 33-inch mark, so I'd be surprised if the Chiefs were interested in him. And then we start getting into day 2, or guys who could mix into day 2. Patrick Paul out of Houston is a name that I like for them. Big, tall, another, honestly, if you look at him on the field, he's a little bit thinner than Orlando Brown, but he looks a lot like Orlando Brown. At the Senior Bowl, he struggled a little bit against bull rush and some stronger pass rushers. Obviously, at Houston, the level of competition wasn't quite what it might be in the SEC, but he's another guy I could see them being interested in as far as prospects for tackle on day 2. And, whenever you get into those day 2 tackles prospects, you're starting to talk about what are their flaws? Why are they here? Kansas fans will be familiar with Dominic Pooney. He's another guy that would make some sense for them. And Javon Foster. I think Javon Foster from Missouri, ironic, we've got 2 local guys, but Javon Foster is another guy. He's not the most agile. He's not going to be that big tester, but he does have the length. And he's a very smart, cerebral player. He's handled pressures well in his time there. So I think all those guys could be there. What do the Chiefs ultimately do? I think that I could see them being on a player like Sua Matia or Guyton, and maybe even using an extra second round pick to move up in the first if they had to go get that tackle to protect Patrick Mahomes' blind side. Or they could go more of the conservative route and bring in a guy like Blake Fisher from Notre Dame or Patrick Paul and have him come compete with Wanya Morris. That Christmas Day game, Wanya Morris was so brutal at left tackle. The offense couldn't function. He definitely was not the only person. Also, shout out Wanya Morris for helping the Chiefs win a Super Bowl, because they all say that was like the game that changed everything. So maybe he was the miracle worker there.
And he was dealing with Max Crosby, in fairness, and that's a hell of an assignment for a rookie, right?
Absolutely. But I think that they could bring in another day two guy and compete with them. Or, going back to the conversation we've had before, do they just try to hit the easy button with free agency like they did last year with Donovan Smith? Frankly, it's annoying to continually have to keep putting our finger in the dam of left tackle, and it just feels like we've been looking for it long-term ever since Eric Fisher left. So will be interesting to see what they do. Maybe they make some big splash, but left tackle's a huge need, obviously, and you would like to see more from Juwan Taylor, frankly.
I think I've been pretty adamant about Wanya Morris at least being the guy going forward. There was a lot of ups, there was a lot of downs, but you see that from left tackles. I always say rookie left tackles and rookie edge rushers, defensive linemen in general. Your rookie season is not a good indicator of what you're going to be. You want to see the highs, but you're going to see a lot of lows. Andrew Thomas for the Giants, right? He was brutal. I mean, horrendous his rookie season. And then what's he now? One of the best tackles. I'm not saying Wanya Morris is going to be that, but I think judging a rookie off his lowest points as a left tackle, it's not good business. I think the Chiefs, in my opinion, would probably bring in another guy. I know you're sick of it, and we all are. But whether it's Donovan Smith back on a 1-year deal, whether it's Tyron Smith, if he can 1 for $8, 1 for $10 million deal. And then you still have Wanya Morris. If you believe Wanya Morris is the right tackle of the future, well, Juwan Taylor, he's basically on his last year of a really large contract. He can get out of it after this season. So there are some moving parts, obviously. I think if the Chiefs draft a left tackle, that should tell you that, Wanya Morris is not that guy, at least early on, I should say. If the Chiefs draft a left tackle in the first or second round, that should tell you that Wanya Morris is not a left tackle, or two, they think Wanya Morris is the right tackle of the future. That's the way I'm viewing this.
Price, what do you think about this kid from Yale? I'm not even going to try to tackle his name because I haven't heard it yet, but he has a massive frame, right?
Kyron Armagaji, I believe is the correct pronunciation. He missed most of this year due to an injury. I don't know if he's going to be testing this week or not, or he might at a pro day. Obviously, when you get a player from Yale, there's some level of competition concerns as far as who all has he really played against. So there's that to be factored in. He does have that tackle frame, right? The long, the lean. He's got the long arms as well. There's not a ton of power or in his game. I know Mitch Schwartz was kind of talking about on his Twitter the other day that there was some talk about him as a prospect. He's another guy that I think is in that day 2, day 3 range. I know it's a favorite mock for the Chiefs as far as like people doing mock drafts go. He's just one of those guys. I think this is kind of an important demarcation for tackle prospects. How comfortable are you with them starting week 1 for the Chiefs on opening night? At left tackle on Patrick Mahomes' blind side. Kyron does not fall in that range of I feel super comfortable. So maybe it is a Wanya Morris to start out the year or a Donovan Smith, and then you go to him later. He's definitely a player that you would like as far as you like the upside. And obviously you like the intangibles of, he went to a prestigious school and is probably very cerebral as a player. But he's another name. And there are those guys. The thing that I like about this year compared to last year, you basically had a tier of players that met those tackle thresholds and then just not much. There's several guys this year who are tackles that were tackles in college football, but are going to probably move to guard, like Troy Fontenot from Washington is one of those players. I didn't talk about what's his name? I've got him on my big board, but the guy from Jordan Morgan from Arizona, he's another guy that had sub 33-inch arms at the combine or at the Senior Bowl. I assume he'll probably measure in a little short this time too. I think he could move in as well, but there's guys on day 2 and day 3 who do have the length, who do have those thresholds. And, there's elements to the game that need to be improved. But a lot of people tell you Andy Heck is one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL. So you feel good about, again, kind of buying that market.
I think we Chiefs fans, when we're looking at offensive line prospects and doing the mocks and everything, we're always thinking who has 35-inch arms that we can get in the second or third round, like they'll magically work out. There's a reason players like that have been discounted. And I'm kind of getting, after hearing you talk about him, Lucas Niang vibes. So Sterling, you have any other thoughts here?
No, man, I think it's perfect. Offensive line's an interesting one where the Chiefs have a type, as we've mentioned. They're going to go and try and get a pass protector more than a run first type of dude. That's just the way they've typically operated in the past. Athleticism is going to be paramount, which again, that's why I think some folks might have some questions about Wanye Morris. Even Donovan Smith was a little bit of a question mark with his age and his descending athleticism. I always think it's tough when you go offensive line in the first round because I don't think you reap the rewards year one. I just don't think, and people are going to be upset. And you're in a win now window. I think an offensive line or an offensive tackle in round one might not be the smartest move.
Yeah, I don't want to shit on FAU because I think there's still a pretty good chance he'll be a decent player, maybe even a very good player. But it would suck for 2 years in a row not to get much out of that first round pick when you're trying to three-peat. We really need someone who can step in and contribute. It's a hard thing to kind of parse out and decide what you want to do, because do you want to pick the 8th best receiver? Well, what's the difference between the 8th best receiver and the 13th best receiver? We know that second round hit rates for receivers are about as good as first round hit rates. So the position to go with there is going to be a difficult decision for them, because at 32, there's going to be a smorgasbord of options, and you just kind of get the feeling they'll probably go with the best player. You'd like to think as a fan that they're going to be all in on a three-peat, but that's just not how the Chiefs operate. They're thinking long-term. They're thinking we have Patrick Mahomes till he's 40 years old. We're going to do the smartest thing for the long-term health of our franchise. And long-term health of the franchise leads us to this final question for the group. Clark Hunt, in this new NFLPA survey, got an F-, lowest of all the owners. And then in terms of cash over cap spending over the past 5 years, the Chiefs have been 24th. So they really don't believe in pushing cap flexibility. There's no salary cap on things like facilities, recovery science, all these other things. So I have to ask you guys, is Clark Hunt cheap?
I don't want to say cheap. I'm not going to go there, but I do think the training aspect of this is beyond inexcusable. Like not having enough trainers for the players where they feel like they can't go and get just your usual just pre-treatment. Yeah, you don't have a major injury, but you're trying to get ready for the week and they feel like they don't have enough trainers. That's absurd. We're talking about the product. We're talking about the $1 million product that you invest in, and they feel like they don't have the right training staff to help them. That is absolutely absurd. If you want to complain about travel accommodations, okay. If you want to complain about some of the meals, fine. I think that's even a little bit inexcusable as well, because you're talking about the players trying to stay in shape, what they put in their bodies. Okay. But when it comes to the training staff itself and they feel like they don't get treated the correct way, that to me is absurd. There is no excuse for that.
One thing that I'll bring up, and this gets into a bigger discussion about results over process. Like, is Patrick Mahomes just the only thing keeping the Chiefs from being, this historically bad franchise for most of it? It might be true, right? Patrick Mahomes is just that good. But like the bad feedback about the trainers, is that because of the level of care they're getting, the amount of trainers that they're getting, or is it because Andy Reid and his training staff, they don't let you sit out for every little limp and ache and pain? And like historically, the Chiefs have been one of the most healthy franchises over the last couple of years. They do not lose a lot of players to season-ending injuries. How many teams this year did the Chiefs play in the playoffs that one of the biggest storylines going into it was just how dinged up they were? And the Chiefs have just been able to avoid that. Part of the reason that is because they have one of the younger teams in the NFL because of how they are built through the draft. But some of that has to be chalked up to Rick Burkholder and the job that they do. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything, but one thing I would also bring up is we don't know what level of participation this gets from the players. I don't know if every single Sterling,
I'll tell you right now, it's 1,700 players in the NFL. So if you break that down, it's you're I think the guesstimate was around 60 to 80% of the players from each team. And so my thought process is you probably aren't telling your boss, because we always hear great things. I'm not trying to even, this is just me extrapolating here on a thought here. You never hear anything bad about the Huns. You never hear anything bad. You don't hear him even being called cheap. You hear that about like the Bengals owners, right? He's not traditionally viewed in that mindset. But yet here we are back-to-back years. And to an extent, it's because it's anonymous, right? You're not going to tell your boss to his face, the guy that pays you, that you think he's ass. Like, you're not going to tell him that you think that that he does not value you. You're not going to tell your boss that to his face. So this might be one of those situations where, okay, and I know the thought process last year was, okay, yeah, it's just 1 year guys who are upset that they're not getting the job back. No, they interview and take polls of enough players that one, Mahomes isn't going to make it one way, and one, a dude who's disgruntled and is leaving is not going to move.
LaShawn McCoy or whatever.
Exactly. This is going to be in the middle. So this to me does come with with some truth to it.
There's a big enough sample size. So my other concern is when you have this problem with the facilities and the reputation of the owner, we're trying to make this the number one free agent destination in the league. And when you also have an owner who's traditionally not willing to push the flexibility of the salary cap, like a lot of owners are, it's just going to be harder for them to attract guys to come here when they have these different obstacles that they have to get over. And it seems to be the issue with the locker room is not their locker room at Arrowhead. I believe it's the locker room at their training facility, which they use a lot more than the regular locker room at the stadium. And correct. There was a promise that I don't think has been fulfilled is the issue, that this was supposed to be revamped a couple of years ago. It hasn't been. I think the players are upset about that. And I think we can have some nuance about Clark Hunt. We can say when it comes to football decisions and hiring great football player, he doesn't really have an equal in the NFL. He's great there. He's involved. He's interested. He's invested, but he doesn't let his ego hurt the team. So you have to give him credit on that front. But at this point, I think you have to say he's a little frugal, and it's disappointing because you would like the Chiefs to have an owner who would be putting their foot to the gas right now when you have a once in 100-year quarterback in your building.
Yeah, and I think you can get into a bigger discussion here about like what are we talking about, right? We're talking about a billionaire who has basically gotten here by having the correct dad, which, shout out to him. Good work if you can get it. But his primary occupation is owning sports teams. That's the primary occupation of that team. They don't have just this steady revenue stream like some of the other teams do, whose ownerships have, been like, big invested companies that they rise to power. So yeah, he basically runs the company, the team, by owning the team and funneling that money back into it. You can sit here and hope all day that billionaires are going to start sharing more of their money with the world. But that just hasn't went very well historically over time. So it does stink. And I do think that it is kind of a reality, the cash spending. The one thing I will say about the cash spending is like when it really matters, they have done right by the players that need to. Like they did not cheap on Patrick Mahomes' contract, and they've re-upped him, and they've found contracts to make him, in theory, the highest paid player in the NFL or the highest paid player in North American sports, etc. So while I do think that it is a concern, and you certainly don't love it as far as the optics and how are things going to look post Patrick Mahomes, I do think that they have done a good enough job of making sure that they take care of the things that matter. And I hope that crosses over to what Chris Jones is, right? Like Chris Jones is a player that has definitely earned his reputation here in Kansas City. And I get, the DiCaprio rule that you guys were talking about, but it's at some point, there's some guys that their name deserves to be up there in the Ring of Honor and they deserve to retire as a Chief. And Travis Kelce's been one of those players too. So I do think it's a concern, but I don't think it's something that is franchise altering.
Yeah. And you're also seeing guys like Stephen Ross in Miami, David Tepper in Carolina, new owners who are just throwing money around because they're desperate to make a splash and get competitive. And I just don't think that's, again, the Chiefs model. They're in this for longevity, and that's just kind of the way they see things. I think the Chris Jones situation, that will be very telling about whether the Chiefs are willing to exceed certain thresholds for non-quarterbacks, because the Tyreek Hill thing, I think there's a lot of different stuff wrapped up in Tyreek Hill that kind of makes him a unique situation. Plus, there's a surplus of receivers. So I could see them kind of saying, well, this makes sense, and all of us agreeing. If they do it with Chris Jones again and can't get a deal done, at that point, we kind of have a trend maybe. Any closing thoughts, Sterling?
No, man. I find it the most egregious part is the training staff. You got to take care of your players. I wonder if this is a reason why, we have been told time and time again, we've been shown time and time again, players typically value the money over chasing a ring. Whether we think, oh, get a chance to win a ring, while that may mean a lot to us, and while that may mean a lot to some players, the majority, it seems like they chase the money over the ring. But I wonder how much this type of how much of this rings to the players in free agency? How much see the practice facility and say, yeah, okay, yeah, the stadium's great, but that's only 10 games a year. That's the 8 home games and maybe 2 in the playoffs, right? But the practice facility where you're at every single day almost, you're there 100 plus times a year maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's going to play an impact. Like I do think there is some underlying things that if they could address, I wonder how that would affect free agency. Again, we may never know completely, but I do think it's, again, the trainer aspect of this to me is inexcusable.
And a lot of this business is optics, right? When you're trying to build a culture and bring new people in, and just being ranked 31 out of 32 for the defending Super Bowl champs is just not a good look. Well, that's all we've got for you guys today. Props to our chat. As always, we appreciate you. Please mash the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't. Audio pod listeners on Spotify and Apple, please consider giving us a 5-star review. All that helps AA grow even faster. Join us next Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Central, right here on the Arrowhead Addict channel. Until then, enjoy basking in the glory of being the defending champs, and let's get ready to keep talking draft. Go Chiefs.